Where did all the greatest empires go? Ask the Romans. Why did they vanish from Venice? Why is there no trace of Roman presence in the city? And where are their legendary, long-forgotten ruins? You will be shocked to know that the Romans built nothing in Venice at all. No aqueducts, no temples, not even a single road. The great Venetian Empire once ruled the Mediterranean. Their ships were the swiftest, their glass was the finest, and their republic lasted for 10 centuries. It never lost a war. But how did this tiny island of lagoon come to dominate the sea? How did they turn glass into gold? And how can we save Venice now? Let's find out what happened to Venice. The Italian peninsula has always been shaped like a boot. Only it wasn't Italy back then. It was a patchwork of independent city-states and bishops vying for power. 2 major rivals dominated northern Italy, the Archbishop of Milan and the Bishop of Venice. For years they fought over islands in the Adriatic, but everything changed when the barbarians arrived. At first, it was only minor raids, but soon entire Germanic tribes started pouring into northern Italy. In 476 AD, the Germanic king of the Ostrogoths deposed the last Western Roman emperor. Now, the Bishop of Venice needed to protect his small coastal town from these new invaders. He recruited Slavic and Germanic mercenaries. Soon he controlled an army of 2,000 elite troops. With their help, Venice defeated its old rival, Milan, and claimed all of the islands in the Adriatic. This victory established the Venetian Republic. They had no king or emperor, only a council of nobles that elected a doge as the head of state. In the next century, Byzantine emperors invaded Italy. They tried to restore Roman rule, but the Venetians defeated them. They pushed the Byzantines back into Greece and took more islands in the Aegean. Suddenly, Venice was a maritime empire. They ruled over 3,500 miles of coastline with 40 major cities and 1.5 million subjects. But while Venice got rich, the mainland fell into chaos. 3 kingdoms battled for northern Italy: the Ostrogoths, the Byzantines, and the Franks. But none of them could control the sea. That job belonged to Venice. They had the fastest ships in the Mediterranean thanks to their unique technology. You have probably heard about the Venetian galleon. It was the most famous ship in the world. But how did it work? Before the Industrial Revolution, shipbuilders used a technique called carvel construction. First, they cut straight planks of wood along the curvature of the hull. Then, they overlap the planks and nail them together. The result is a smooth, streamlined hull. But the downside is that you need expensive tools and experienced craftsmen to build a galleon. Otherwise, your ship will leak. Fortunately, the Venetian lagoon had a solution. Shipyards there invented a new way to build galleons called carrocchiola. Instead of expensive tools and expert builders, all you need is a mold. To make a carrocchiola ship, you first shape 2 long pieces of wood into a hull. Then you lay a grid of ribs across the hull, filling the shape. Finally, you fill the open spaces between the ribs with small wooden pegs. Voila! You have a new galley. This method made Venice the cheapest and fastest shipbuilder in the Mediterranean. And Venice built hundreds of these sleek, black galleys. They were manned by slaves captured from North Africa. Venice alone could put 40,000 men on ships every year. For 3 centuries, Venice used their fleet to pillage the riches of the Byzantine, Frankish, and Gothic kingdoms. They even raided the Russian Empire. But their favorite target was the Muslim world. Venice traded glass beads and coral for slaves and gold. Soon, the Venetian nobles grew fat on plunder, and the Republic became the richest in Europe. But how did they spend all that money? Back in the 5th century, Venice was a swamp. Their only advantage was water. So the nobles spent their treasure transforming the lagoon into a city. They built canals instead of streets, palaces instead of houses. Within a century, Venice looked like a jewel in the Adriatic, and the rest of Italy looked like a backward village. It wasn't only canals and palaces. Venice also developed advanced engineering works. They built the first modern lighthouse in Europe. It had a cylindrical tower with a balcony on top. When ships entered the lagoon, they could light fires on the balcony. That way, everyone could see the light from miles away. Without a lighthouse, sailors would have to guess the exact location of the harbor. They might sail right into the shallows and get stuck. The Venetian lighthouse wasn't the only technological marvel. Their glass was renowned throughout the Mediterranean. Glassblowing appeared in Venice around the 8th century. At first, Venetian glass was nothing special, just simple bottles and windows. But soon, Venetian glassblowers created exquisite masterpieces: cups with gold leafing, perfume bottles, stained glass windows, and chandeliers. Their masterpieces sold for twice the price of gold. The secret was hidden in the sand. Glass blowing requires one key ingredient: silica sand. Silica sand is pure silicon dioxide. It's incredibly hard, so it takes hours to melt. But if you find high-quality sand, you can blow it into beautiful shapes. Unfortunately, most sand isn't pure enough. Limestone and other minerals make the glass cloudy and weak. Luckily, Venice had a unique source of silica sand. On an island near Venice, the people mined pure white glass. It blew into incredible shapes without impurities. Soon, all the wealthy sultans and popes wanted Venetian glass. They sent embassies to the island of Murano to buy the purest silica sand. It was worth the trip. One piece of Venetian glass could reflect a sultan's power or a pope's holiness. But why didn't Venice lose a single war? Secret weapon: gunpowder. As soon as gunpowder reached Europe, the Republic began stockpiling cannons. By the 13th century, they had the most powerful navy in the Mediterranean. The Doge could assemble an army of 2,000 soldiers and 1,000 sailors within 2 weeks, and nobody could stop them. Their enemies couldn't match Venice's shipbuilding or glassmaking. So they tried to starve Venice out. The Republic was surrounded by powerful states like Germany, France, and Spain. They imposed embargoes, blockading Venetian ports and burning their ships. But those attempts failed. The duchy reorganized trade routes and kept shipping goods. Other times, they simply went around the blockade. The duchy had the fastest ships in the Mediterranean. Most merchant ships took 2 months to travel from Venice to Greece, but galleys could do it in a week. Yet Venice may have perished without one final invention: the Republic's shield. Imagine living in Venice during the Crusades. Christians and Muslims hated each other. Outside the lagoon, Venetian sailors risked attacks from both sides. What could they do? The answer was simple: blend in. Soon, Venetian ships were painted in red, green, and orange. Crew members wore turbans, colorful robes, and golden jewelry. They pretended to be Muslim merchants from the East. That way, Christian and Muslim pirates thought they were fellow worshippers. Of course, Venetian sailors pretended to be Muslim. Inside the lagoon, they shed their robes and picked up weapons. They defended their ships with pikes and scimitars, swords with curved blades. Thanks to their disguise, few Venetian ships were ever attacked. And that's why Venice never lost a war. But that's not the end of our story. In the 15th century, European explorers discovered new trade routes to Asia. They didn't need Venetian middlemen anymore. Venice had peaked, and their best days were behind them. The Republic survived for another 200 years, but they never regained their power. Today, only a few thousand tourists visit the Venetian islands. Nobody knows what happened to their legendary glass, and their glorious palaces are now just empty ruins. Now, please answer. Was Venice the greatest maritime empire in history? Or was it just lucky? Please leave your answer in the comments, and remember to subscribe for more adventures. Doge's Palace is one of the most beautiful buildings in Venice, and it's also probably the least visited. You see, when people visit Venice, they flock to St. Mark's Basilica. They take pictures of its colorful and ornate facade. But then once they're done with that, they head over to Doge's Palace and they notice that this building looks pretty similar and they think, must be related. And then they go back to taking pictures of pigeons because pigeons are funny, right? But Doge's Palace was no mere offshoot of St. Mark's. It was the beating heart of Venetian civilization. and without it, there would have been no glorious republic. So in today's video, we're going to tour the interior of Doge's palace and learn what made it so special. So the palace is called Doge's Palace because at its center was the Doge's Palace, which is to say the home and office of the Doge, who was the ruler of Venice. But even though it was the Doge's house, it was never his personal residence. Instead, it was sort of like a White House situation where the Doge would go to work every day. He would receive ambassadors and foreign dignitaries there. He would host important banquets and festivals. But then, at the end of the day, he would just leave and go back to his own private palace elsewhere. Now, you might be wondering why the Doges didn't live here if it was such a great palace. Well, the reason is that the Republic of Venice was founded on the principle of separating church and state. The idea being that the Doge, who was the head of the state, shouldn't also be the head of the church. And so while the Doges were almost always Christian, their official residence had to be somewhere other than the cathedral or the bishop's palace. In fact, the separation of church and state was so thoroughgoing in Venice that technically the Doges weren't even allowed to be priests. And so for the first 300 years of the Republic, Venice had two Doges who split the duties of the office. One of them was the civil Doge, who was elected by vote of the major families and presided over the courts and the government. And then there was the spiritual Doge, who was elected by the clergy and presided over church affairs. But anyway, back to the palace. The structure itself was built between 1348 and 1483, although much of the artwork inside dates from much later when Venice had acquired a taste for magnificence. And the architecture follows the same general principles as the rest of Venetian Gothic buildings. That is to say, it's all about the decoration. The exterior has colorful marble inlay and hundreds of statues of saints and historical figures. But then inside it's a riot of gold leaf and fresco paintings, and everywhere you look there's something new to catch your eye. Now obviously, a lot of this stuff was meant to impress visiting ambassadors and make the Republic seem more important than it actually was. But it also served another very practical function. See, back in the Middle Ages, literacy was extremely rare, and so the only way that ordinary people could learn about the world around them was through images. And so instead of reading books, people would just go around visiting cathedrals and palaces and basically do museum hopping. And so, in order to attract visitors, everything in Doge's palace was designed to tell the story of Venice. Whether that was the detailed mosaic depicting the creation of the Republic, or the numerous portraits of famous Venetian military leaders. And these images weren't just meant to entertain. They were also meant to remind everyone who was in charge. In the Middle Ages, kings would often commission giant portraits of themselves so that nobody would forget who the king was. And so, throughout the palace, there were dozens of paintings and sculptures reminding everyone that Venice was ruled by a succession of doges. And since the Doge was considered to be the first among equals, there was also a gigantic statue of him sitting on a golden throne at the center of the great council room. Now, Doge's palace was huge, but it had the same problem as the Roman Colosseum. Nobody knows exactly how big it was because much of it has collapsed. In fact, an earthquake in 1976 damaged much of the roof, which is why today you'll see scaffolding surrounding the entire structure. But from what historians can tell, Doge's palace consisted of 5 main parts. First, there was the courtyard, which was surrounded by 2 stories of arches and columns. Then there was the Sala del Maggior Consiglio, or the Great Council Room, which was the largest room in the palace and featured one of the most famous pieces of Venetian art, the Paradiso by Jacopo Tintoretto. This painting depicted the Doge and other members of the Venetian nobility entering paradise, heaven. And so, for centuries, any visitor walking into the Great Council Room would be reminded that worldly power went hand in hand with divine favor. Then there was the library, which contained hundreds of manuscripts and was considered to be one of the most important collections in Europe. Next, there was the Pinacoteca, which was sort of like a cabinet of curiosities where the Doges could display their favorite works of art. Finally, there was the Prigioni, which were the prisons for the palace. Now, normally, you wouldn't put a prison in the middle of your palace, but back in the Middle Ages, the palace wasn't really a place where anyone lived. It was just a place where important meetings were held. And so the prisoners were kept in a separate wing, and their cells were decorated with frescoes depicting scenes from Dante's Inferno. Now, we've only covered about half of the rooms inside Doge's palace, but trust me, the other half is even better. For example, there was the Sala del Scrinium, which was the Doge's bedroom. Legend has it that Napoleon slept here during his invasion of Venice, and so there's a big sign pointing that out, but it's also decorated with some of the most beautiful frescoes in all of Venice. There was also the Sala del Colonnato, which was used for receiving foreign ambassadors, and so it's decorated with a bunch of weird, ugly, uncomfortable chairs that the ambassadors would have sat in. And then, across the hall, there was the Sala della Carcerata, which was used for holding important prisoners. It's got some nice frescoes, but the coolest thing about the room is that you can see down into the courtyard and watch the pigeons. Now, we're not going to cover every single room in Doge's palace, but I did want to finish up by talking about the Doge's courtroom. It was one of the most important rooms in the palace since the Doge was the head of the judicial branch. But, unlike the other rooms, it was extremely austere. There were no decorations or frescoes. Everything was bare stone, and the only hint of color was the red velvet covering the judge's throne. This was intentional, of course, since judges were supposed to be impartial and objective. They shouldn't be influenced by emotions like art or beauty, and so the room was intentionally devoid of anything that might distract the court. It's hard to imagine now, but Venice was once the most powerful maritime empire in the Mediterranean, and so the Doges needed a grand palace to match. But in the end, they couldn't compete with the wealth and splendor of the kings of Europe, and so the Republic fell and Doge's palace became nothing more than a museum. Now, if you ever go to Venice, I highly recommend checking out Doge's palace. I promise you won't regret it. But I'm curious, what did you think of the Doge's palace? Let me know in the comments. Also, big thank you to our supporters for making these videos possible. If you want to see your name on the screen, then you too can support us. The link is in the description. Anyway, I'll see you next time. And he said, I want to build Jerusalem. And God said, You are not worthy to build my house. And he was very angry in his heart and cursed that day and called the name of that place, and it was called Mishpat, which means quarreling, because there he contended with God. Have you ever heard the name Mitzpe? Mitzpe is a small village in the mountain tops of northern Samaria, not far from Nablus. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive from Jerusalem, high up in the hills overlooking the entire valley. You can see for miles and miles in every direction. It is situated on top of a mountain, hence the name Mitzpe, which means lookout or watchtower. It was built on the top of a mountain because back in the days of Joshua, they needed a lookout. They needed to see what was happening around them, and so this particular lookout was very important. It sits today as a small village where maybe 250 people live there today, a handful of houses. But 3,000 years ago, when Joshua came and conquered Canaan, he stopped at this very spot and he looked out over the land that God was going to give to Israel, and he built an altar there, and every stone in its streets whispered of glory, not of cues, but of conquest and creation, of the giving of the law and the promise of return. When Joshua came to lead Israel into the Promised Land, he sent 2 spies into the city of Jericho to check it out, to scope it out. One of them was named Joshua, the same name as the leader, but we call him Rahab's Joshua, because he ended up marrying a woman by the name of Rahab who lived in Jericho. He ended up marrying her and having children with her, and one of their descendants was King David. King David, the greatest king Israel ever had. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of this place. And then I want to focus in on 3 lessons that I learned last week when I was there walking around on that mountaintop, seeing where all these amazing things took place. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of this place. The history of this place is rich and full of amazing stories. When you read Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 10, it says, And it came to pass afterwards that Joshua, when the Lord spoke with him at the end of the 40 days while he was about to come to rest on Mount Nebo, he said to him, "Here is your chance. Here is the land that I have given to your offspring. Only rebel against the Lord, and do not obey his voice. But if you truly obey his voice, I will banish you from my presence." So Joshua climbed up into the mountain, he and Eleazar the priest, and they said there. There is a very interesting story about that. There's a cave where they sat there for 40 days until Moses died, and we have a great commentary on that. If you want to hear more about that, you can look it up on our website. In the cave, apparently, there was a pillar that held up the roof, and when Moses hit that pillar with his staff, the roof collapsed and Moses died. We don't know exactly where that happened. Some believe it was in this area, but it could have been up north near the Lebanon mountains. We don't know. All we know is that Moses died. After 40 days of ascending this mountain, God said to Joshua, "Here is your chance. This is your moment. Lead the people into the land that I am giving them. Go on, take it. But here's the thing, and this is the first lesson. Here's the instructions. And here's what happens if you don't follow the instructions. Either way, you get to choose." God gave Joshua an opportunity. Sometimes God gives us opportunities like that to either choose to walk in his ways or to walk in our own ways, to choose life or death. God told Joshua, "Do not turn aside from the path that I command you. Do not turn left or right." Why? Because once you start turning left or right, it's a slippery slope. It's a slide down the hill, and the next thing you know, you're not where God wanted you to be. God gave them clear instructions, and sometimes God gives us clear instructions. Sometimes God may give you instructions on how to care for your body, what to eat, what not to eat. Maybe he's telling you to exercise. Go run. Go work out. Maybe he's telling you to spend time with family. Spend time in prayer. Maybe he's telling you to leave a job. Stay in a job. Whatever it is, you need to listen to the voice of the shepherd and do his voice, his voice, his voice. Don't turn left. Don't turn right. That's the voice of God to you today. If you've turned left or right, turn back. Turn back to God today. Turn back to the place where God has called you to be. The second thing that happened was something very strange. When they were ready to enter into the land of Canaan, the land that God had promised Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all of their offspring, when they were ready to go in, God said, "You're not ready. You have no faith. You have no trust in me. I'm going to make you wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and I'm going to put a new generation in instead." Wow. Is God really that strict? Yes. Is God really that merciful? Yes. Can God really change his mind? Yes. When Israel said, "My God is a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," God said, "No, he's not your God anymore. He's my God, and he's going to be your God if you become a new generation, and if you trust me again." And this is what happened to them. They wandered in the wilderness. Every single person died except Joshua and Caleb. They were the only ones that got to enter the promised land because they trusted God's word. Now, this is the second thing. Many times God will delay things to purify us. Sometimes we want to do something right away. We want to get married, buy a car, get a job, move someplace, whatever, and God may delay it because he wants to purify us. He wants us to wait on him. He wants us to trust him. He wants to give us a clean heart. He wants to give us a right spirit. He wants us to seek him first in all things. Psalm 103 verse 5 says, "For he waits patiently for you, he waits. He is waiting patiently for you to seek him, to find him, to look for him." God is waiting for you. He's waiting for me. He's waiting for us to seek him. If you haven't sought God, it's time to begin seeking him now. If you feel like you've been waiting a long time for something, it's time to seek God. It's time to fast. It's time to pray, humble yourself, and seek God. Many times when we're waiting on God, we don't think that he might be waiting on us too. We think that we're ready. We think that we've done enough. We think that we've prayed enough. We think that we've waited long enough. But maybe we need to keep waiting. Maybe we need to keep praying. Maybe we need to keep seeking God and getting to know Him more. The Bible says in Proverbs that the person who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So maybe God is saying, I'm not ready for you yet. Let's spend some more time together. Let's spend some more time getting to know each other, letting you know me and me knowing you. Let's go deeper in our relationship. That's what God was trying to teach Joshua. Spend some more time with me. I'm not ready for you to lead my people just yet. You need to spend some more time with me. Get to know me better. Know my voice better. Trust me better. Believe me better. Put your faith in me better. That's what God was trying to say to him. And thirdly, God said, Okay, you're ready now. Now go and conquer the land that I'm giving you. Joshua didn't conquer it. The priests and the Levites and the people of Israel, they all conquered it. Everyone played a part in conquering the promised land. Joshua wasn't a dictator. He didn't march into battle by himself. He marched with the priests, he marched with the Levites, he marched with the people of Israel. And the priests would blow their trumpets and everyone would shout and they would conquer together. We are all part of a team. We're all part of a body. We are not individuals unto ourselves. We need each other. We need the body of Christ. We need each other to help us. We need each other to pray for us. We need each other to encourage us. We need each other to show us where we're wrong and to speak truth into our lives. The last thing I want to say about this place is that it reminds me that God never forgets His word. God never forgets His promises. There are places mentioned in the Bible that we don't even know where they are, and there are places mentioned in the Bible that we do know where they are. God never forgot this place. This place stayed here. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's still here, the exact same place. And we can come and stand on this mountaintop and we can see for miles and miles and miles, and we can believe that God is going to fulfill His word. He's not going to forget His word. He's not going to forget us. He's not going to forget the promises that He made to us. No matter what happens, no matter what we do, God is faithful. His word is true. His promises are sure. As the mountains are the same and will always be the same, so are God's promises to us. This is Venice. It's arguably one of the most postcard-worthy places in the entire world. And this is the Rialto Bridge, arguably one of the most postcard-worthy bridges in the entire world. When you come to Venice, you see the Grand Canal and you think, that's it. That's the quintessential Venice. But when you come to Venice and you see the Rialto Bridge, you think, no, that's it. That's the quintessential Venice. But here's the thing. The Rialto Bridge wasn't built for postcards. No, no, no. The Rialto Bridge was built for the pulse of a city alive with ambition, a city that was hungry for power, wealth, and trade. Now, let's go back in time to 1588. At this point in history, Venice has been a republic for nearly 100 years. It's a maritime republic spread across 118 small islands, all of which are separated by these tiny canals. The Venetian Lagoon is a hub for trade between Europe and the Middle East. It's a golden age for the Republic of Venice. And with all of this trade comes a lot of foot traffic. People are moving from island to island and across the lagoon, and they need a way to get around safely. You know, there's nothing worse than getting stuck in traffic. Just ask any New Yorker. So they want to improve the transportation situation in Venice. And they start looking at the Grand Canal, thinking, how can we make this work? They need a bridge. Now, the thing about building a bridge over water is that you need some sort of support structure underneath. And what they came up with was a simple yet brilliant solution. They decided to use boats. No, seriously, they took boats and they lined them up next to each other and then they filled them with concrete and then they capped it off with stone. And that became the foundation for the Rialto Bridge. And if that sounds crazy, well, it totally is. But sometimes crazy works. The first version of the Rialto Bridge opened in 1591, and it stood for about 60 years. Now, while the idea of a boat bridge might seem kind of flimsy, the materials used for the Rialto Bridge were anything but. The bridge's superstructure was made out of solid blocks of Istrian stone, imported specifically from Croatia for the project. These stones were massive, weighing up to 3 tons each, and they were so heavy that they had to be cut into smaller pieces once they arrived in Venice because they couldn't fit through the gates. Those massive stones created an arch that was nearly 20 meters tall, which gave passing ships plenty of clearance to sail underneath. And not only did this design solve the issue of transportation in Venice, but it also provided an important piece of infrastructure for trade. You see, the bridge contained a number of shops, and those shops provided much-needed services like warehouses and offices. Many merchants used these spaces to store their goods or conduct business, and this helped to boost the local economy. Now, I mentioned that the first iteration of the Rialto Bridge stood for 60 years. Well, during that time, Venice went through a pretty dramatic climate shift. See, until the 17th century, Venice enjoyed a Mediterranean climate, which meant warm, dry summers and mild, wet winters. But starting in the mid-1600s, the temperatures began to drop, and rain became a lot more scarce. All of a sudden, Venice had a serious flooding problem, and that caused a lot of damage to the Rialto Bridge. In 1630, the Venetian government decided to close the bridge to pedestrians because they were afraid it was going to collapse. Now, the bridge wasn't closed for very long. In 1632, they reopened it to the public. But in order to do that, they had to rebuild the whole thing. So they brought in a new engineer named Andrea Palladio. If that name sounds familiar to you, well, that's probably because you've heard of the famous basilica designed by Andrea Palladio, but that's neither here nor there. This Andrea Palladio was a different guy. He looked at the existing structure of the Rialto Bridge and he thought, okay, we can work with this. Now, instead of having separate arches for each boat, he linked them together with stone spandrel walls. What this meant was that there were no longer individual arches. Instead, you had one continuous structure that looked like a series of arches. If that sounds confusing, don't worry, I got you. Let me break it down for you. Imagine you have a bunch of boats parked next to each other, right? And these boats are the arches of the bridge. Now, normally, if you put a stone bridge over this, you would have to build a stone pier to hold up each boat. But instead, Palladio decided to fill in the space between the boats with concrete and then cover it with stone. What this meant was that instead of having a bunch of individual arches, you had one solid structure. This made the bridge stronger and more stable, and it also gave Palladio a chance to show off his incredible engineering skills. Now, it wasn't just a smart move from an engineering perspective. It also made sense from a logistical standpoint. You see, by filling in the space between the boats, Palladio was able to create solid stone piers that could support the weight of the bridge and the traffic that would be crossing it. This made it easier to transport goods and people across the canal without having to worry about the stability of the bridge itself. And let's not forget about the aesthetics of it all. By creating this continuous arch-like structure, Palladio was able to create a visual masterpiece that has become one of the most iconic bridges in the world. The Rialto Bridge was officially reopened in 1646, and it stood for another 300 years. But why am I talking about this bridge? This isn't an engineering channel. Well, you're right, this isn't an engineering channel, but that doesn't mean that engineering isn't everywhere. It is. Engineering is everywhere. Even something as simple as a bridge can teach us about the world around us and the people who lived before us. You see, bridges are more than just a way to get from one place to another. They're a reflection of the ingenuity and creativity of the people who built them. And the Rialto Bridge is a prime example of this. When Andrea Palladio was tasked with rebuilding the Rialto Bridge, he didn't just copy the old design. He looked at the existing structure and thought about how he could improve it. He used his knowledge of engineering and his creativity to come up with a solution that was not only stronger and more stable, but also more visually appealing. The Rialto Bridge is a testament to human ingenuity, and it's a reminder that even something as simple as a bridge can be a work of art. Now, as we wrap up our story, I want you to think about the impact that one man had on Venice. You see, When Palladio was hired to rebuild the Rialto Bridge, he didn't just have a vision for the bridge itself, he had a vision for Venice. He wanted to create a structure that would not only serve the needs of the city, but would also enhance its beauty. And he did that. The Rialto Bridge is not just a functional structure, it's a symbol of Venice. It's a symbol of the city's wealth and power, and it's a symbol of its beauty and grace. And when you visit Venice today, you can still feel the pulse of the city that Palladio envisioned all those years ago. You can feel it in the bustling crowds, in the vibrant colors of the buildings, and in the majestic canals. And when you cross the Rialto Bridge, you can feel it in your heart. Okay, I'm getting a little emotional, but that's the story of the Rialto Bridge and why it matters, and that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something new. Now, if you want to learn more about amazing bridges from around the world, I got you covered. Just check out this playlist right here. Also, I want to take a moment to thank my supporters. Your support really means a lot, and it helps me keep producing these videos. So, thank you. If you want to support the channel, you can do that by clicking the join button below or by becoming a member on my website. And if none of those options are for you, you can always just subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. That way, you'll never miss an upload. All right, that's it for me. I'll see you next time. Bye. Venice was a city that dared to dream of greatness while everyone around them was busy drowning. In the year 642 AD, Venice was born out of nothing but courage and trade. It was an improbable beginning for what would soon become one of the largest cities in Europe. This is the story of how they did it. The early history of Venice is lost in the mists of time. The lagoon where the city would rise had been inhabited by people since prehistoric times. But we can trace the roots of Venice back to 420 when Germanic tribes known as the Goths invaded Italy. They raided the coastal town of Malamocco, forcing its residents to flee across the lagoon to the islands of Torcello and Pono. Here they were joined by refugees from other Gothic raids, people who simply wanted to escape the violence of the mainland. And slowly but surely, they began to rebuild their lives on these small strips of land surrounded by water. Now, the exact origins of the Venetian people are unknown. We think they were a mix of refugees fleeing the Gothic invasions, local lagoon dwellers, and even a few Goths themselves who decided peace was preferable to plunder. Whatever their origins, the Venetians quickly adapted to their watery surroundings, building boats and learning to fish. They also developed a unique form of government, a council of elected officials who would make decisions by majority vote. It was a radical idea at the time, basically democracy, but that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say that in many ways, Venice was ahead of its time. In the year 642, the Venetian people reached out to the bishop of neighboring Aquileia and asked him to send missionaries to convert them to Christianity. Soon after, the first church was built, and Venice officially became a Christian city. Around this time, the Byzantine Empire started to feel threatened by the growing power of the neighboring Lombards. So, in 662, they appealed to Venice for help. The Venetians were happy to oblige. In return, the Byzantines granted them permission to collect the salt tax on their behalf, which meant the Venetians could keep everything they collected beyond what was needed to pay the tax. This was a huge boost to the economy of the lagoon and allowed the Venetians to flourish. They built more boats and expanded their trade network throughout the Mediterranean. They even started raiding Lombard ships passing through the lagoon. Just for protection. Of course, they were careful not to provoke the Byzantines, though, because they were still technically under their protection. By the 8th century, Venice was a major trading hub and shipbuilding center. They were so good at making boats, in fact, that the neighboring Patriarchate of Aquileia hired them to build a fleet of warships. But this brought them into conflict with the Muslims who controlled much of the Mediterranean shipping lanes. At first, the Venetians tried to stay out of it, but when Muslim pirates attacked a Venetian merchant ship, they declared war. This may have been the first military engagement in Venetian history, or it may have been the last. Because by the 9th century, The Venetian Republic was established, and the lagoon was united under one flag. As the centuries passed, Venice grew steadily in power and wealth. They defeated the Byzantines in battle, expelled the Franks from the lagoon, and negotiated a treaty with the Germans that secured their independence. They even survived an invasion by Napoleon. So what made Venice so resilient? What made this improbable city on the water endure for so long? The answer, I believe, lies in the very nature of Venice itself. From its humble beginnings as a refuge for people fleeing violence, Venice grew into a powerhouse of trade and exploration. Its location on the water gave Venice unparalleled access to the rest of the world, and its citizens were quick to take advantage of this. With their ships, they traveled to distant lands, bringing back exotic goods that were in high demand in Europe. This trade made them very wealthy and powerful, and they used this power to protect themselves from outside threats. Venice was truly a city like no other, and this was both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. You see, Venice was built on water, and this made it vulnerable to flooding, but it also made it uniquely beautiful. The canals of Venice are what make it so picturesque today, but they were also a necessity. The Venetians had to build their houses on stilts over the water, and they used the canals to transport goods and people. Even today, there are no roads in Venice. Everything is accessible by boat or on foot. Another thing that set Venice apart was its government. Unlike most Italian city-states, Venice was ruled by a grand council of nobles rather than a king or emperor. This made Venice more stable and less prone to corruption, but it also made it more difficult to raise an army. Defending the Republic often required the help of mercenaries. But perhaps the most important thing that set Venice apart was its spirit. The Venetians were a brave and adventurous people. They were willing to take risks and explore new things. This is what allowed them to build such a powerful navy and explore so much of the Mediterranean. The Venetians were also very proud of their independence. They were fiercely protective of their lagoon and would defend it with their lives. There is perhaps no better example of this than the Battle of the Lagoon in 978. That year, a fleet of 2,000 Byzantine ships attacked Venice, but they were met by a Venetian fleet half that size. The Venetian ships were smaller and slower, but they were more maneuverable, and the Venetians knew the waters of their lagoon like the back of their hands. After 3 days of fighting, the Byzantines were defeated and forced to retreat. This victory secured Venetian independence and showed the rest of Europe that the little city on the water should not be underestimated. Over the next few centuries, Venice grew into one of the most powerful and prosperous republics in Europe. Their navy dominated the Mediterranean, and their merchants were some of the richest in the world. But all good things must come to an end. And in the 15th century, Venice began to decline. Their economy weakened, their navy became less powerful, and their rivals began to encroach on their territory. But despite all of this, Venice never gave up. They fought back against their enemies and managed to preserve their independence until Napoleon conquered Italy in 1797. When Napoleon came to power, he ended the Venetian Republic and incorporated Venice into his empire. This was the end of over 1,000 years of independence for the Venetian people, but it was not the end of Venice itself. Today, Venice is a part of Italy, and it is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. Every year, millions of people visit Venice to admire its canals, its architecture, and its rich history. So, what can we learn from the story of Venice? How can we apply it to our own lives today? I believe that Venice teaches us the importance of courage, curiosity, and independence. The Venetians were not afraid to strike out on their own. They were willing to risk everything to create a better life for themselves. They explored the world and brought back new ideas and goods to their lagoon. And they fiercely protected their independence from outside threats. These are all qualities that we should strive for in our own lives. We should be courageous enough to take risks and pursue our dreams. We should be curious about the world and open to new experiences. And we should be independent thinkers who are not afraid to stand up for what we believe in. Today, Venice is a shadow of its former self. Its population has declined, its economy is weak, and its rivals have taken much of its territory. But despite all of this, Venice endures. It is a testament to the courage, creativity, and independence of the Venetian people. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please subscribe and leave a comment below with your suggestions for topics that I should cover in the future. Until then, goodbye. The remains of an ancient temple complex lie at the bottom of a lake in Cambodia, swallowed by time and nature long ago. It's all that remains of one of the most important religious centers of the Khmer people, once home to a grand high temple and over 200 smaller shrines, housing the relics of the Buddha. But today, the only remnants above ground are a few moss-covered towers poking through the water and a causeway leading to an unknown destination. The reason for its abandonment and eventual demise is unknown. But why? Was it a natural disaster, neglect, or a deliberate act? And what made this temple so special in the first place? Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be exploring Pre-Rup, a temple complex built during the 10th century, dedicated to the memory of an enlightened being who achieved nirvana after meditating under the Bodhi tree in the Indian subcontinent. According to legend, he spent the next 40 years teaching the Dharma until his death at the age of 80. When King Yasovarman of the Khmer Empire heard about Buddhism, he immediately set out to build a shrine in honor of it. Thus began the construction of Pre-Rup, which took several hundred years to complete. Its many temples were constructed in tiers like a wedding cake, with each level representing different aspects of reality and different levels of consciousness. At the top sat the highest level of reality, enlightenment, where the Buddha is said to have meditated. When Jayavarman VII ascended to the throne, he declared himself the God King, believing he was a direct descendant of the Buddha. He also greatly expanded the city of Angkor Thom, building new walls and moats, erecting huge gateways adorned with divine beings, and installing himself on the throne of the Bayon Temple with its enigmatic smiling faces. During his reign, Angkor reached its peak both in size and wealth. After him, however, the empire began to decline, though not before worshipping Buddha at Pre-Rup. Pre-Rup was probably originally entered from the south along a broad causeway flanked by 2 rows of enormous divinities holding up a central tower. However, the entire complex was later flooded, forcing visitors to use an alternate route via another causeway. This one passes between 2 rows of trees, creating a tunnel effect that has earned the structure the name of the Avenue of the Dead. It leads to a square pond in front of the temple's main gate. From here, the visitor could choose to walk around the outer wall of the temple, perhaps stopping to admire the bas-reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu mythology, such as Brahma riding on his swan. After passing through a second gateway decorated with winged demons called apsaras, you arrive at the final causeway leading to the temple itself. Along the way, you pass by 3 60-foot tall brick towers connected by low causeways. These were likely built much earlier than the rest of the complex, dating back to the 9th century. To reach the top of these structures would have required a steep climb. Hence, they were probably used as burial towers for important members of society who wished to be close to the divine. Once on the summit of the highest tower, the visitor can descend into a labyrinth of tunnels carved into the bedrock beneath the temple. Each turn presents a new surprise, whether it's intricate patterns or lintels depicting historical rulers, such as King Suryavarman II giving offerings to the gods. The tunnels are pitch black, so a torch is recommended. The passage eventually opens up into a cavern filled with Buddhas sitting in various meditative postures. Some are only a foot tall and barely visible amidst the moss and foliage. Others are many feet tall and carved in the round. It feels as if you're walking through a sacred forest filled with spirits. And yet this is only a small part of the temple complex. What lay beyond is a sprawling network of pathways connecting numerous shrines and sanctuaries, each more breathtaking than the last. For example, there's the Sanctuary of the Thousand Buddhas, so named because it contains thousands of tiny statues of the Buddha carved in the round, each unique and beautiful in their own way. The site also includes a baptistery with niches on all four sides, which may have been used as a place of baptism. A gallery with 120 niches containing Buddhas from different eras, some standing, some seated, some preaching to disciples, and even a library with shelves on every side filled with ancient scriptures. In addition, there are towers, ponds, causeways, reservoirs, all designed to represent different levels of existence and different states of consciousness. The idea was to make the pilgrim feel as if they were walking through the very heavens themselves, ascending higher and higher towards enlightenment. All in all, it's one of the largest and most elaborate temple complexes in all of Cambodia. Unfortunately, only a small portion of it is accessible due to the overgrown vegetation and the danger posed by poisonous snakes. But what makes the temple so dangerous? Why was it abandoned and left to decay? Like many other ancient sites in the region, it was probably abandoned after the 15th century when the once mighty Khmer Empire collapsed. As centuries passed, the jungle reclaimed the city, vines creeping up its towers, roots burrowing into its foundations, and trees growing right out of its walls. By the 19th century, it was completely forgotten until explorers rediscovered it in the 20th century. It's not clear why Pre-Rup was chosen as the site of the Great Temple. However, it may have been due to its proximity to the confluence of two rivers, which may have been seen as a sacred place where the earthly realm touched the heavens. Or it may simply have been the center of a vast network of waterways that connected the empire's many cities and provinces. Whatever the reason, it became the focal point of religious activity and pilgrimage for hundreds of years. During the 12th century, it was visited by a French missionary who wrote about its towering spires piercing the sky, its galleries filled with divine beings, and its halls echoing with the chants of monks. He also described how pilgrims flocked from all over Southeast Asia to bathe in the temple's pools, believing it would wash away their sins and bring them closer to the divine. During the 13th century, it was visited by a Venetian merchant who described the devout Buddhists prostrating themselves before the Buddha, how they walked barefoot over red-hot coals without flinching, how they hung by hooks in their flesh from branches without falling. But the temple's fame did not last forever. As the Khmer Empire declined, so did Pre-Rup. By the 15th century, the city had been sacked by rival powers and the jungle was reclaiming the city. When European explorers rediscovered it in the 19th century, they found only a crumbling ruin overgrown with vegetation. They cleared away some of the debris and published the first detailed account of the temple. But it soon fell into disrepair once again. Today, the reason for its abandonment and eventual demise is unknown. But why was it built in the first place? And why was it so special? It was special because it represented a way of life, a world view that saw the world as an illusion and the self as an illusion of that illusion. It was special because it offered a path to enlightenment, a way to escape the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth through meditation, good works, and faith in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It was special because it provided a community, a sense of belonging and purpose in life. Many people found solace and meaning in Pre-Rup, just as many people still do today. Though the temple may be lost to the jungle, its spirit lives on in the hearts and minds of those who seek truth, beauty, and compassion. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. This is one of the most influential ships ever built. From east to west, its ships carried more than goods. They carried influence, ideas, and empire. When Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic in 1492, he brought with him to the New World the riches and culture of the Renaissance. In this, the first of our series on the great ships of history, we will explore the stories behind these vessels that changed the course of human civilization and how you can visit them today. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa, Italy, in 1451. a port city whose ships were renowned throughout the Mediterranean for their speed and beauty. And it was here that the young explorer learned the skills that would one day take him to the Americas. But by the time he was a man, the Genoese were no longer at the forefront of maritime innovation. This era marked the beginning of Portugal's Age of Discovery, a period of intense exploration along the West African coast. By harnessing the power of the Atlantic winds, Portuguese sailors had circumnavigated Africa and reached India, shattering the long-held belief that the Earth was flat. While Columbus would be the first European to reach the Americas, his discovery wouldn't have been possible without the innovations of the Portuguese. In 1488, when Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the world began to shrink. For the next 15 years, European powers raced to establish dominance over trade routes to the east. It was an obsession with wealth that fueled this age of exploration, the desire to find new sources of gold and spices to fuel the economies of European kingdoms and cities. It was this search for riches that led to the creation of some of the most important ships in history. The Santa Maria was one such vessel, a large three-masted carrack, a type of ship typically used for trading along the coast. Built in the port of Palos de Moguer in southern Spain, the ship was around 60 feet long and 3/4 of the width of the ship was below deck. With tall masts and square sails, the Santa Maria was perfect for traveling the open seas, but she was also deep enough to navigate shallow coastal waters, making her ideal for exploring uncharted waters. She was also equipped with lateen sails, triangular sails set on the mizzenmast that enabled the ship to sail more efficiently against the wind. They helped the Santa Maria maintain speed even when the winds shifted, allowing her to reach the Americas despite contrary winds. Although her sister ships, the Pinta and the Niña, were smaller and faster, the Santa Maria was perfectly suited for the journey ahead. On May 3, 1492, after outfitting the ship with supplies for a 2-year voyage, Columbus set sail from the Spanish port of Palos de la Frontera with a crew of 90 men. He would never return. 1 month into the voyage, storms battered the ships, threatening to capsize them or smash them against the rocks. Scurvy and starvation became widespread among the crew, weakening them both physically and mentally. Many of the men begged Columbus to turn back, but he pressed on, believing that land was close. His determination paid off on October 12th when the lookout shouted, "Land!" When Columbus first sighted the Bahamas, the 3 ships sailed back and forth along the coastline, taking on supplies and fresh water before continuing on to explore farther north. The Santa Maria grounded herself on Christmas Eve on the northern coast of Haiti, forcing the crew to abandon ship and build a fort called La Navidad. There, only one of the ships that brought Columbus to the Americas met its end. The other 2 returned to Spain, carrying back to Europe the promise of untold riches to come. News of the voyage sparked a wave of exploration and conquest as European nations scrambled to claim the riches of the New World for themselves. Over the next 2 centuries, explorers would use larger, sturdier ships to cross the Atlantic and colonize the Americas. But none would have been possible without the Santa Maria. Built in 1519 in the Spanish port of Cadiz, the Trinidad was a massive 3-masted carrack with a length of over 100 feet and a beam nearly 30 feet wide. Her holds were immense, able to carry nearly 700 tons of cargo. Her high sides and deep hull allowed her to remain stable in rough seas, while her square rigging and 4 lateen sails provided enough surface area to catch even the gentlest of breezes, propelling her across the Atlantic with ease. The Trinidad's construction represented the height of 16th-century shipbuilding, and she would play a pivotal role in the Spanish colonization of the Americas. Her maiden voyage was part of a massive 3-ship convoy sent by the Spanish crown to conquer and explore the Caribbean. Under the command of Sir Francisco Pizarro, the Trinidad sailed from Spain in 1520, reaching Panama in 1521. From there, the fleet continued on to Peru, where Pizarro led an army that captured the Inca capital of Cajamarca and took the Inca Emperor Atahualpa captive. With the Inca Empire destabilized, Pizarro led a brutal campaign that resulted in the deaths of thousands of Inca people and the seizure of vast amounts of gold and silver. The riches taken from the Inca would help finance the construction of grand cathedrals and palaces across Spain, fueling the country's economic and cultural development. The Trinidad played a key role in the Spanish colonization of the Americas, transporting settlers, supplies, and, most importantly, treasure back to Spain. However, she wasn't just a passive participant in this colonial enterprise. Her cannons boomed as Spanish soldiers battled indigenous populations who resisted the conquistadors' advance. In 1522, the Trinidad foundered off the coast of Florida during a voyage laden with treasure. Her wreck remains lost, holding perhaps still the echoes of the cannon fire that once shook the seas. By the middle of the 17th century, European powers were eager to monopolize trade in Asia. To do so, they needed ships that could endure the arduous journey to the East Indies and withstand battles with rival navies. Enter the Mayflower, a 60-gun warship launched in 1625 by the British Royal Navy. At nearly 100 feet long, she was a sleek, powerful vessel designed to traverse the globe and dominate the seas. Her 3 masts were rigged with square sails, allowing her to harness the power of the wind for speed. But it was her guns that made her truly formidable. Cannons were placed on the upper deck, offering a broadside of 32.5-inch cannons that could fire a 65-pound ball, capable of tearing through wooden ships and shattering coastal defenses. The Mayflower was a product of an evolving naval technology that shaped the course of world history. Her first mission was to sail to the East Indies to obtain spices and luxury goods. As part of the British East India Company, her presence was a symbol of growing European influence in Asian trade. However, she also played a crucial role in the struggle for dominance between Britain and the Dutch. The Anglo-Dutch Wars were a series of conflicts fought between the two nations from 1652 to 1674. The Mayflower and her sister ships were instrumental in establishing Britain's naval supremacy, outgunning and outmaneuvering the Dutch in battle. But the Mayflower's most famous voyage had nothing to do with war. In 1620, after enduring a tempestuous journey across the Atlantic, the Mayflower carried 102 passengers to the shores of what would become known as New England. These pilgrims, seeking religious freedom from the Church of England, landed at Plymouth Rock, marking the beginning of English colonization in North America. The Mayflower's legacy lives on in the story of America itself, serving as a reminder of the ideals of religious freedom and self-governance that shaped the nation's founding. Today, replicas of the Mayflower can be seen in museums and historical sites across the United States, offering visitors a glimpse into one of the most important chapters in American history. The Mayflower, though significant, foreshadowed the coming Industrial Revolution. The next ship we'll discuss epitomized the power of steam. The Industrial Revolution marked a turning point in human history. Machines powered by steam replaced hand tools, leading to mass production and the rise of factories. This technological leap transformed the way goods were produced and shipped across the world. No ship embodied this transition better than the Great Eastern, a paddle steamer built in 1858. At a staggering 224 feet long and 54 feet wide, the Great Eastern was the largest ship of its time, boasting a displacement of 23,500 tons. Her hull was constructed of wrought iron, a durable material that could withstand the immense pressure of the steam engine. Her twin paddle wheels, each measuring 26 feet in diameter, churned the water as she steamed majestically down the river. The Great Eastern was not just bigger, she was smarter. Her paddle wheels were connected to a pair of oscillating engines, an innovation that increased efficiency and reduced vibration. The result was a ship that could travel at speeds of up to 18 miles per hour, a feat unheard of just a few decades earlier. The ship's grandeur extended beyond its mechanics. The Great Eastern featured opulent interiors, including a grand staircase, ornate carvings, and luxurious cabins. The dining saloon was a masterpiece of Victorian design, complete with gilding and furnished with antiques. The ship was a floating palace, a testament to the wealth and innovation of the era. Her maiden voyage in 1858 marked the beginning of a transatlantic passenger service. The Great Eastern's success paved the way for a new era of travel, shrinking the world and bringing distant shores closer together. But the ship's legacy goes beyond its commercial success. The Great Eastern pushed the boundaries of engineering, demonstrating the potential of steam power and the possibilities of transatlantic travel. Though she met an untimely end, colliding with another ship and sinking in 1885, her impact on maritime history was immeasurable. Today, artifacts from the Great Eastern are displayed in museums, reminding us of a time when steam power ruled the seas. Join us next time as we continue our journey through history's greatest ships. When it comes to Italian landmarks, few are more recognizable than the Venetian gondola. For centuries, these flat-bottom boats with their distinctive red and green striped awnings were the main form of transportation through Venice's winding canals. Today, though, they're mostly used for tourism and are almost as popular as a photo op as they are as a means of transport. Still, that doesn't make them any less important to the history of Venice or Italy as a whole. So, let's talk about the gondola, shall we? First things first, how exactly did these unique boats come to define not just Venice, but all of Italy? Well, to answer that question, we need to look back at the history of Venice itself, because the two go hand in hand. The story goes that Venice was founded by refugees from the mainland fleeing invasions from outsiders looking to plunder their way into what was then known as the Byzantine Empire. To escape the invaders, the refugees retreated to the islands of the Venetian lagoon, which today is where Venice is located. And there they built small boats to help get around the islands and protect themselves from the very people who had forced them to leave in the first place. These early Venetians used boats not only to defend themselves, but also to take advantage of the lagoon's many inlets and waterways to expand their trade network throughout the Mediterranean. This heavy reliance on waterborne transport helped shape not just the political and economic landscape of Venice, but the city's physical layout, too. Since most of Venice's building materials like stone and wood had to be brought in from elsewhere, architects incorporated the canal system into the city's design. Instead of streets and sidewalks, Venice was built around canals and bridges. As such, the humble gondola was born. What makes gondolas special, though, is that they could easily navigate the shallow waters of the lagoon without getting stuck. See, because the Venetian lagoon is sort of a protected body of water nestled between islands, it didn't have the big waves and currents that you'd see out at sea. But this meant that the water level was fairly stagnant and prone to weeds and other debris that would mess up the works of larger ships. Gondolas, however, with their flat bottoms and oar-powered propulsion systems, were light enough to stay afloat in the choppiest of waters, making them perfect for navigating the Venetian lagoon. They were also narrow enough to fit under most bridges so as to not tip over in the process, making them perfect for navigating a city built entirely around canals. Today, there are still 70 or so bridges in Venice. In fact, there are so many canals and bridges in Venice that a map is practically useless since new ones pop up all the time and old ones fall into disrepair. It's actually really easy to get lost there. But aside from being perfectly suited to the environment, gondolas were also perfectly suited for the needs of the people living there. Early Venice was a small collection of settlements on various islands, and the lagoon was vast. People needed a way to move quickly and efficiently across large expanses of water, but they also needed something small enough to dock discreetly and portably enough to carry cargo up onto land. In fact, it wasn't until the 12th century that the gondola started to resemble its modern counterpart. Prior to that, gondolas were simply workboats designed for function rather than aesthetics. They were generally dark-colored to blend into the shadows of the canals and often had to haul cargo or tow other boats. Once the Republic of Venice grew wealthy enough to stop worrying about blending into the shadows, though, the gondolas began to turn heads with bright paint jobs and decorative trim. This coincided with another major development, the addition of the awning. Originally, awnings were an optional feature used mainly for shade, but as they grew in popularity, so did the size and opulence of the designs. By the 16th century, they were becoming status symbols of sorts, with merchants and ambassadors flaunting their wealth in ever more elaborate patterns and colors. This is probably where the iconic red and green striped awning came from, though. There is some debate as to why these colors were chosen. One theory is that the stripes were originally intended to represent the river guides who plied their trade in the Venetian lagoon, and they took on those colors as a symbol of their profession. Another theory is that the red and green represented the lagoon itself, with the green signifying the surrounding islands and the red representing the open sea. The point is, they became popular and people wanted to show off their wealth, so they painted awnings on their boats. These days, though, the awnings are primarily for show. Not only are tourists unlikely to haggle over the price of a gondola ride, but gondola rides don't typically last long enough to warrant any sort of sun protection. No, these days, gondola rides are all about the experience, which is lucky for us because, while the inside of a gondola might not be air-conditioned, it is pretty cozy, especially if you can snag one of the nicer ones. Because even though they've largely given up ferrying people around for money, gondola builders are still taking pride in their craft and turning out beautiful boats that are almost as romantic as they are functional. Nowadays, you won't find a gondola for sale for anywhere near the $100,000 mark, but that's not to say they're cheap either. New gondolas cost upwards of €30,000 to build, which requires a team of highly skilled craftspeople working for months. That's because, unlike modern boats, gondolas aren't mass-produced. Each one is a handcrafted work of art that requires skills that are passed down through generations of gondola makers. To keep things simple, let's break down the parts of a gondola and how they fit together to make one of the most iconic boats in the world. We'll start with the skeleton. Like many boats, gondolas are made with a wooden frame called the keelson, which runs down the middle of the boat and connects the ribs that run from the bottom of the gondola to the top of the awning. The entire structure is bound together with rope or wire. Now, once the frame is complete, the boat's planks can be added, usually made of cedar wood for its water resistance and natural oils that prevent rot and insects. Most gondolas use about 150 planks held in place with copper nails. Today, fiberglass resin is often used to seal the planks together, but historically, mastics made from tree sap, animal fat, and flax were used instead. Then comes the part that really sets gondolas apart from other boats, the iron inserts. Unlike modern boats, whose hulls are reinforced with fiberglass or steel, gondolas are reinforced with lead and iron inserts. These inserts are bolted into place after the hull is finished and are used to strengthen the boat and keep it afloat. Lead was used for this purpose since it's dense enough to keep the boat upright but malleable enough to bend without breaking. These iron inserts also make it possible for gondolas to keep their signature shape even after years of wear and tear. The final step is the finishing touches, painting the boat, installing the oar locks, and rigging up the oar. And yes, before you ask, gondolas do technically have 2 oars, but traditionally only one is used at a time. The second oar is kept on deck as a backup or in case extra power is needed, and it's stored in a special holder called the port gondolier, which is also where the gondolier gets their name. Anyway, once the boat is finished, it's lowered into the canal and is ready to ply its trade. Today, there are still dozens of gondolas in Venice, all of which are carefully maintained and passed down from one generation of gondolier to the next. While they may no longer be the primary mode of transportation in Venice, they are still an important part of the city's history and culture. Taking a ride in a gondola is like stepping back in time and experiencing Venice the way it was meant to be experienced, by water. Speaking of riding in gondolas, though, our favorite way to get around Venice is with a self-driving gondola. If you're unfamiliar, Go boats are basically little driverless electric boats that you can rent with a smartphone app. They're great for exploring the canals at your own pace, stopping wherever you want to take pictures or grab a drink. The best part is that you don't need to be a boating expert or have any boating experience. Just hop in, follow the prompts on your phone, and you're good to go. What's more, they're environmentally friendly, quiet, and speedy. Plus, they're a lot cheaper than a regular gondola ride. Thank you for watching. This is the incredible story of how Venice became the richest city in the world before the discovery of the New World. And it's all thanks to this humble Venetian merchant. The year is 972 AD, and Venice didn't exist yet. There were only a few small villages scattered along these islands in the shallow waters of the Adriatic. But soon, these villages would grow into the most influential city in Europe. Most of the European powers were concerned with building their territories across the Mediterranean. The Byzantine Empire stretched from the Middle East to Italy and even had influence over the rulers of France and Germany. And while they did control these islands off the coast of Italy, they had no interest in settling them. They saw them as nothing but a potential threat for pirates or enemy navies to hide and resupply themselves. But back then, trade was everything. Controlling these islands meant you controlled the trade routes between these two very important cities. So the Byzantines built a few fortresses to keep the peace. But it wasn't really worth it. They kept getting attacked anyway. So in 978 AD, they just gave up and sold these islands to the Doge of Venice, a title similar to the Duke of Venice, basically giving him sovereignty over these islands. Now he had full control over these islands, which was great because Venice had one major problem. They weren't exactly blessed with natural resources. Sure, there was plenty of fish in the sea, but besides that, there was not much to harvest. So Venice depended on trade, but without any navy, they were completely defenseless against pirates and rival Italian states. Luckily, he had an idea to solve both problems at once. You see, Venice was famous throughout the Mediterranean for its skilled glassmakers. Everyone wanted their beautiful glass items, but glassmaking required a lot of space, and the islands had plenty of it. So the Doge invited the glassmakers to move to these islands and build factories here where they could produce glass items to sell all around the Mediterranean. It was a good deal. They got free land and protection, and in return they paid taxes and made the island rich. Within a few years, the glass industry boomed, and the islands started to prosper. But a nearby city was not too happy about this. In 992 AD, the Republic of Pisa, a powerful maritime republic, was furious that someone else was profiting from trade when they did. So they declared war on Venice and attacked the islands. Now they weren't expecting much resistance, but boy, were they wrong. These islands were built for defense. The shallow waters prevented large fleets from coming in, so the Republic of Pisa couldn't land troops. They only had two options: either leave empty-handed or retreat and live to fight another day. Venice had won its first battle, but it needed to be prepared for the next one. So they used their profits from the glass industry to start their own navy. They built fast and maneuverable ships, perfect for the shallow waters of the Adriatic. These ships were so effective that Venice started attacking other merchant ships, pillaging their cargo and growing rapidly in wealth. Soon, the Doge commissioned the construction of the Arsenal, a massive shipyard where they could build dozens of ships a year. And with their new navy, Venice began expanding their territory, taking over more islands and the mainland across the lagoon. By 1084, Venice grew into a vast archipelago controlling crucial trade routes across the Mediterranean. Its merchants were now some of the wealthiest in the Mediterranean, but they faced competition from the Eastern Roman Empire. The emperor controlled trade through the Byzantine provinces and heavily taxed Venetian merchants who wanted to pass through. It was a huge inconvenience, but Venice had a solution. In 1096, Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade to recapture Jerusalem from the Seljuk Turks. Now, Venice saw this as an opportunity to get rid of the emperor's tariffs. In exchange for allowing the Crusaders to pass through their ports, Venice requested that they capture the port of Zara for them, which the Pope agreed to. But when the Crusaders came back victorious, they refused to give Venice the city because, well, they didn't really like them. Venice was forced to take the matter into their own hands. In 1104, they assembled a fleet of 200 ships and invaded Zara, sacking the city and establishing a colony there. The Crusaders were mad, But Venice didn't care because now they had a foothold in the Adriatic. And things were about to get very interesting. The Byzantine Empire was collapsing from within and without. The Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople, looted the city, and took treasures back to Venice. Crusaders didn't like the Venetians anymore either, but at least they left them alone for now. Venice was now richer than ever before, but it was time to put their wealth to use. With the help of Zara, Venice expanded further east towards the Byzantine Empire and even started trading with the Kingdom of Hungary. But it wasn't easy. They had to constantly defend their ships carrying valuable goods across the Adriatic, and for that they needed soldiers, lots of them. But Venice wasn't exactly short on manpower. See, while the rest of Europe was fighting in the Crusades, Venice had grown wealthy by staying out of the conflicts and maintaining trade. This gave them the money to build hospitals, schools, palaces, and, most importantly, pay people to live in the city. Soon, Venice grew into the most densely populated place in Europe. Overcrowding was a big issue, and so were fires because everyone was living in wooden houses. So in 1177, the Great Council of Venice passed a law where only people born in Venice could become Venetian citizens. This ensured that only people who invested in stone buildings could enter the city. By 1300, Venice was almost entirely made out of stone, making it one of the safest cities in Europe in case of fire. But what about the invaders? Well, those pesky Crusaders came back again and tried to invade Venice in 1204, but they were repelled. After that, the Crusaders left Europe and Venice finally had peace. They took this chance to expand their territory around the Mediterranean. They seized Corsica from Pisa, fought alongside Genoa against the Republic of Pisa, and traded with the Moors in the south. By 1325, Venice dominated the Mediterranean, and its merchants financed huge projects like the Basilica di San Marco, one of the most beautiful churches in the world. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe was focused on constant warfare. While the 100 Years' War between England and France raged on, Venice was busy expanding their empire. They created colonies all around the Mediterranean, including this one in the middle of the desert. With the money they earned from trade, they supported Italian explorers like Marco Polo, who traveled to Asia and wrote an encyclopedia about it, inspiring future generations to explore the world. While the rest of Europe was stuck in the Dark Ages, Venice was ushering in the Renaissance. But they wouldn't remain undisputed for long. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople, blocking trade between Europe and Asia. Venice had to find new routes to Asia, but that was easier said than done. In 1480, the Portuguese discovered a sea route to India, while the Spanish discovered the Americas, bypassing the need to go through the Mediterranean. Without European exploration, Venice would have been screwed. But luckily, they had a secret weapon, the most ingenious banking system the world had ever seen. The Doge commissioned the construction of the first public building in Venice. It was a mint where they stamped their own coins instead of relying on foreign mints. This allowed them to collect taxes directly from their citizens and spend it however they wanted. They used the money to finance explorers like Christopher Columbus, who discovered the Americas in 1492, officially ending Venice's monopoly. But they didn't care. You see, while Venice thrived on trade, they understood that banking was the way forward. Instead of transporting goods, they started transporting money, essentially creating a global credit transfer system. If you wanted to trade with Asia, you needed gold. If you wanted to trade with Africa, you needed ivory. And if you wanted to trade with America, you needed silver. The Venetians understood this and capitalized on it. They offered loans to European kings and sultans, who were always short on cash, promising to pay them back with interest after they got the gold, ivory, or silver they needed. In other words, Venice became the bank of the world. They loaned money to everyone and anyone, even the King of France who defaulted on his loan. When he died, Venice seized his assets, including his wife Isabella and his son Charles, holding them hostage until the French crown paid back the debt. To make matters worse, the French king's brother, the Duke of Berry, tried to steal some of Venice's treasure. He planned to meet up with a group of mercenaries near a church, but the Venetian police infiltrated the group and arrested the Duke of Berry, along with several popes, cardinals, and even the King of Romans. In total, Venice collected 10 million florins in fines from these criminals, becoming the wealthiest city in the world. But Venice's greed would eventually be their downfall. They were so busy collecting taxes and defending their empire that they forgot about one thing: their own military. When Napoleon invaded Italy, Venice had no army to defend itself and was forced to surrender. Napoleon abolished the Venetian Republic and divided its territory among his allies. From being the biggest city in the world to being nothing but a memory, Venice's fall was painful, but at least it went down in history as one of the greatest banking empires the world has ever seen. Have you ever seen these pictures of Venice underwater? If so, you probably also saw headlines claiming that global warming is literally drowning the city. But this couldn't be further from the truth. There is no climate emergency in Venice, and those terrifying images are just artistic photos from a tourist attraction called the Sea Venedig, or Venice underwater. The whole idea is to scare people into thinking Venice is literally drowning, even though it isn't. It's a $2 million art installation designed to raise awareness for climate change. It was created by an Austrian artist named Andreas Gursky. He submerged the entire Piazza San Marco in artificial seawater and then hired actors to play terrified tourists running away from the flood. A similar exhibit was put on in 2009 in New York City. They flooded Times Square with 3 feet of water and had actors playing victims of Hurricane Sandy, which hit New York City in October of 2012. These 2 exhibits were both part of a worldwide campaign by the Climate Action Network to warn people about the dangers of global warming. But here's why Venice wasn't at risk of drowning. Venice is a city built on water, but it's not built near water. It's built in the middle of it. The reason for this is that Venice sits in a lagoon, which is basically just a fancy word for shallow body of water cut off from the sea. This protects Venice from large storm surges and high waves. In fact, the Venetian lagoon is one of the best natural harbors in the world. Another reason why Venice isn't drowning is because the city was built on top of the water, not in it. The architecture of Venice is designed to keep the city dry, like their ingenious system of canals and bridges. Sure, there are islands within the lagoon that have mountains and hills, but the city of Venice itself was built on piles of rocks and dirt that were brought up from the bottom of the lagoon floor. Then buildings were constructed on top of them. This was necessary because without a solid foundation, building on water is nearly impossible. You can build houses on stilts over water, but you can't build cities on stilts. To support Venice, thousands of wooden piles were driven into the seabed. Then the dirt and rock foundation was placed on top of the piles, and buildings were constructed on that. So, although the city is in the water, it's not actually built in the water. Instead, it's built on piles that are in the water. The art exhibit makes it look like Venice is drowning, but in reality, the flooding we see in the exhibit didn't come from rising sea levels or bigger storm surges. The water was trucked in from the nearby Adriatic Sea, dumped into the plaza, and then drained away once the photo shoot was over. It was really just a shallow puddle. Also, it wouldn't take much work to remove the water from the square. All they had to do was open the floodgates and let gravity do the work. There are 4 floodgates in Venice that protect the city from the Adriatic Sea. They're called mollusks. 2 of them are fixed and stay shut all the time, while the other 2 open and close depending on weather forecasts. When big storms are expected to hit, the mobile gates are closed to prevent a flood. But on normal days, they are wide open, letting ships pass through to Venice. During World War II, the Germans bombed the mobile floodgates, making it harder for Allied forces to invade Venice. And when they finally captured the city, they found out that the gates were damaged beyond repair. Since then, the mobile gates have been replaced by modern gates that are equipped with motors to automatically open and close. If a big storm surge or high tide does hit Venice, the locals have another defense. They use a network of pumps to suck water out of the canals. When activated, these pumps move water from the canals to a place outside of Venice where it can flow out to the sea. They can pump between 480 and 660,000 gallons of water per second. That's enough to drain all of Venice's canals in less than 3 hours. But these measures haven't always worked. In 2019, a storm surge caused a flood that covered 80% of Venice, trapping people in their homes and ruining millions of dollars worth of artwork. Most of the time, however, Venice is able to keep its canals dry, which is why it does not make sense to freak everyone out by showing what would happen if the city drowned. It might seem like a good idea to raise awareness of climate change, but scamming people into thinking Venice is literally drowning isn't the way to go about it. Unfortunately, this isn't the only time Venice has been used to spread fear about climate change. In 2008, the New York Times published an article titled "Venice Could Be Underwater by Century's End." The article warned readers that unless something is done about global warming, Venice may be underwater by 2100. The article implied that rising sea levels would cause the Venetian lagoon to overflow, which would drown Venice. But this isn't true. There's no evidence that the Venetian lagoon will overflow in the next 100 years. In fact, the mayor of Venice said that there is nothing to worry about. Venice has been protecting itself from the sea for 1,500 years, and we have plans to keep protecting it in the future. So why did the New York Times publish this false warning? Well, back in 2008, there was a meeting at the European Parliament about what to do about global warming. Lots of politicians from around Europe attended the conference, including officials from Venice. Before the meeting started, journalists got their hands on a draft of the plan. It included this map showing how sea levels could rise in major cities around the world. And when the map was presented at the meeting, everyone freaked out. They thought global warming was going to cause Venice to drown. As soon as the news of this so-called Venice drowning plan got out, the officials from Venice immediately denied it. They said that Venice is safe from rising sea levels and that they have no plans to abandon the city. However, the damage was already done. People all over the world read the New York Times article and panicked. They thought Venice was in danger of drowning, so they started visiting the city in droves to see it before it was too late. This sudden increase in tourism caused big crowds, traffic jams, and long lines to get into the city. Obviously, this made the people of Venice angry. They felt like the New York Times set them up to be the next big tourist trap. And it's not like they don't already have enough of those. Now, back to the show. In 2020, Venice experienced its worst flood since the Middle Ages. Water filled St. Mark's Square, and many of the historic buildings suffered serious water damage. Archaeologists say the floods were caused by heavy rainfall and a strong windstorm that hit the Venetian lagoon. It sounds like something the people of Venice could handle, right? Well, they might have been able to stop the flood if they weren't dealing with hundreds of thousands of tourists. Tourists tend to congregate in central areas, and central areas tend to have the worst flooding. Although the floodwaters didn't last long, they did cause $1.3 billion in damage to the city. Some business owners believe the tourists caused the flooding. Every year, Venice receives about 20 million visitors. And in 2019, they introduced a new fee to limit the number of day trippers who come to the city. Day trippers were charged €10, but locals and people staying overnight in Venice were exempt. The hope was that charging day trippers would reduce the massive crowds, but it ended up having the opposite effect. Locals protested the new fee because they didn't want to pay for something that would benefit them in the long run. If the city gets any less crowded, locals will start suffering. In the short term, however, the fee did make Venice less crowded, and maybe that's what caused the flooding. After all, if fewer people were visiting, the locals wouldn't have been prepared for such a big storm. After the devastating flood, the mayor of Venice took action. He invested in better infrastructure, repaired the city's flood defenses, and opened more museums and public buildings to make room for the incoming tourists. This seems to be working. The mayor is now talking about making Venice even busier. He wants to attract 30 million visitors per year, but the mayor won't stop there. He wants to expand the city to new areas, like the islands outside of the Venetian lagoon. He's calling this project the New Venice. It includes plans for new hotels, restaurants, and shops. Basically, the mayor of Venice wants to turn the entire region into one giant tourist trap. He says that this will help the local economy and preserve Venice for future generations. But will it really? Or will the new developments just worsen the flooding and ruin Venice for good? Only time will tell. Thanks for watching.